English translation 400th contact Sunday, 25th September 2005, 15:11 hours.
Hello, there you are again. Be welcome.
Greetings, Edward. Yesterday it was a bit tedious with the proofreading because Bernadette misspoke so often while reading. Maybe we should cut down on the hours.
I noticed that too. So I'm going to ask her if we should shorten the time, which would be a pity, because everything has gone well so far. Maybe she was just tired.
A clarification will be useful. But now we should concentrate on our work. When we finish, I will tell you some new predictions.
Thanks. Writing the contact reports is a bit of a hitch, because I am too busy with the 1,800 questions you brought me. It takes a lot longer to work them all out in answers than I said.
There is really no hurry, so you can take your time. We have calculated up to 12 months for the answer. It is a very large work, which includes a large book.
I noticed that too when you were gone and I looked over the questions. But look here, I have some notes. I keep getting asked about the crystal heads found in South America and the alleged Philadelphia experiment. Of course, I have explained again and again that the crystal heads have nothing to do with extraterrestrials and therefore cannot be traced back to them, but that these crystal heads were made in Germany in the 19th century. Nevertheless, this does not want to be accepted as the truth, nor does the fact that the Philadelphia experiment only corresponds to a fantastic swindle, because such an experiment has never taken place. Now here, this man here, a Mr. Ehrman from Germany, would like me to ask you again, and I am then to publish the answer in a bulletin. Could you please give a brief answer to the questions?
Officially, we never talked about it, but only several times in private. So I would like to give an answer, which should be official, but I will limit myself to the essential. The crystal heads you mentioned, which were found in Southern America and attributed to the Maya and supposedly originated from extraterrestrials, were, as you just said, produced in Germany in the 19th century, in the gemstone and diamond-cutting workshops of those places that were merged to form the city of Idar Oberstein in 1933. The client was a wealthy man named Florian Rosenfelder from Germany, who was privately and as a hobby engaged in archaeology, and who also brought the crystal heads to the Mayan areas, where he discovered them as a sensation. However, he was only able to place the crystal heads at different places, where he thought to discover them under witnesses, but he was not able to do this anymore because he died of poisoning, which he suffered from locals who robbed him. And what can be said about the so-called Philadelphia experiment? About which, first of all, an author named Berlitz wrote an imaginative book. There has never been such an experiment, neither in the USA nor anywhere else on the earth. The whole fantastic story is basically based on the fraudulent claims of a man named Cal Allen regarding an alleged experiment with a ship called the USS Eldridge. The man thought that his tall tale would enhance his image and make him rich. When he did not succeed, and the situation became too precarious for him to be exposed as a liar, he disappeared without a trace.
I know the story, but I did not know what the ship was called. It is said that in October 1943, the U.S. Navy conducted an experiment in the port of Philadelphia with enormous electromagnetic swinging waves, etc., whereby the ship mentioned then disappeared without a trace and reappeared 500 kilometers away in the port of Norfolk, only to disappear again after a short time and become visible again in the port of Philadelphia.
Yes, that is the tall tale in a nutshell.
Liars' tales, as they have been and continue to be spread all over the world regarding alleged alien contacts and alleged alien abductions.
Which, unfortunately, many humans of the Earth consider to be reality and truth without hesitation,
while denouncing effective reality and truth as lies and deceit.
That is unfortunately actually so, which is why you are slandered and insulted. Because they banish the truth about your contacts with us into the realm of deceit and lies, while they elevate all swindlers, liars, and cheats of both sexes and let them lead themselves astray.
This cannot be changed because, as the saying goes, the world wants to be cheated and lied to. The truth therefore counts for nothing, but only lies, deceit, charlatanry, and forgery. But let us leave that alone, because talking about it is useless. Every human must reach the truth himself or herself through their own rationality and through their own intellect.
Then let us now turn to the correctional work. That is how we did this work. And thus I want to tell you the next predictions. On the 1st of October, suicide bombers will carry out new bomb attacks in Bali, which will, of course, also result in deaths. After that, Taiwan and China will be hit by a heavy typhoon, which will, of course, cause more deaths and great damage. At about the same time, El Salvador will be hit by a volcanic eruption of the Ilamatepec and a catastrophe of many landslides due to torrential rains caused by a big hurricane called Stan, which will affect about 300 villages and cause the loss of lives. Guatemala and Mexico will also be severely affected, with Guatemala in particular suffering severe destruction. In total, the hurricane will cause more than 2,000 deaths in all affected countries. Several hundred dead alone, inhabitants and visitors, will be buried under 12 to 20-meter deep mud of a landslide of a nearby volcano in a Mayan village called Panabaj and will not be found again. This will be followed by an earthquake of magnitude 6.2 in El Salvador, which will be followed by a second one. But Pakistan will also be affected by a severe earthquake measuring 7.6 on October 8th. The devastation will be extremely enormous and will reduce whole villages and small towns to rubble and ashes, and there will be many more deaths, in the tens of thousands. From this quake in the north of Pakistan, near the Pakistani Muzaffarabad, which is followed shortly after the first by another one with a magnitude of 6.6, but which is then followed by dozens of unusually extremely strong aftershocks, and again a stronger one with a magnitude of 5.6 on 13th October. Indian Kashmir, India and Afghanistan, as well as China, will also be severely affected. Many of those areas where you have lived and worked for some time and have many acquaintances and friends, many of whom will unfortunately lose their lives in the earthquake. What the quakes will do to China, no great words will be spoken about it, but there will be much disaster and destruction there as well. In Morocco, in the first days of October, hundreds of people flee from African countries to the Spanish exclaves of Ceuta and Melilla. These are economic refugees who want to go to Spain and other European countries, but who are being brought back to Morocco. Unfortunately, there will also be deaths if Moroccan guards use weapons against the refugees. This is what happens when, on the border with Europe in Turkey, the bird epidemic spreads to domestic poultry through migratory birds, while the same epidemic also enters Romania and will raise the alarm. The bird epidemic that is occurring in Turkey, called H5N1, is the type of disease that can spread to humans in the event of a mutation and is also transmissible from person to person in such circumstances, although this is still being played down criminally by narrow-minded medical science. The fact that the disease is called influenza is also erroneous, because it is effectively a disease, and indeed about a pandemic or pandemic of birds and poultry, which is spreading over countries and continents. The simple term flu or bird flu is misleading in terms of what ordinary people understand, because they generally understand flu to be just a simple and harmless influenza, and thus a simple cold, which is not what the term flu means. Influenza falls under the term disease, and thus means, first, that it is an infectious disease which is endemic or limited to a limited area, and second, that it is an epidemic which corresponds to an infectious disease which occurs in large numbers and is localized and temporary. And the third influenza factor is the pandemic, which, as an infectious disease, is locally and temporally unlimited and thus spreads across all countries and continents, and possibly even throughout the world. And a pandemic of birds and poultry is the bird epidemic, which is being trivialized by the scientists, governments, and medical experts responsible for terrestrial humanity. Criminally misleadingly simply called bird flu, because the medically uneducated people understand it to mean something not necessarily very dangerous, although the exact opposite is the case. Now, this explanation is not intended to be panic-mongering, but only an explanation to make it clear to the Earth humans what the usual flu and bird epidemic really is. For the time being, however, the pandemic is still restricted to birds and poultry and is still harmless to humans if they do not come into direct and unprotected contact with contaminated birds or poultry. At about the same time, in the USA, it emerges that the Senate, by an overwhelming majority vote, opposes the methods of violence and torture with regard to prisoners who are to be subjected through gay vault, to use all available coercing means, powers based in the psyche, mind and consciousness, capabilities and skills, in order to carry out and wield monstrous, immense, tremendous actions and deeds, and torture into confessions and the release of secrets, etc., as has been and continues to be demanded by the U.S. scum President George W. Bush and his kindred spirits and their executing henchmen in Afghanistan and in Iraq, etc.
Of course, in the name of the dear God and his blessing, completely in accordance with the evangelical sectarianism of Bush and his followers, but also in the sense of the Bible, freely according to the principle of revenge and retaliation, as it has been practiced in Christianity since time immemorial, by stoning, strangling, flogging and torturing, by the death penalty as well as by murder and manslaughter, etc., and with regard to the storms in El Salvador, Guatemala and Mexico, as well as the great earthquake in Pakistan. You said recently that with regard to such events, from now on everything will finally take on worse and worse forms, and will surpass everything that earthly humanity has experienced up to now. You also said that the process could no longer be stopped. But what still has to be said about Bush, he, as a supreme sectarian, cries out for revenge, death and retribution, just as the Christian religion has done since time immemorial, namely to persecute and murder the fallible and enemies with death and destruction, which is also still done by all other religions, except Buddhism, today. And it is precisely within this framework that Bush thinks and acts, whereby in his case the desire for revenge and vengeance is founded on the one hand in a cowardly fear, and on the other hand in the drunkenness of having heard the voice of God, who was supposed to have given him the mandate to fight terrorism worldwide, so to speak, as God's representative on earth. In the same chorus his followers are howling, including members of the evangelical sect, who have found a full member in Bush and therefore support him in his delusion of bringing murder and destruction upon the world. If this were not so, they would not have elected the hypocrite as U.S. president.
You call a spade a spade. These natural events, which according to our studies and clarifications have now suddenly risen from 50 to 70% human guilt, apply from now on to all regions of all countries, and more frequently, enormously and devastatingly. And what you said about Bush as a sectarian and the evangelical sect in terms of revenge and retaliation against fallible people and enemies also applies to other sects and to the Christian church and all religions, with Buddhism being a notable exception, at least in this respect.
But which also contains many heresies, just like all other religions and sects.
Which cannot be denied. But let me now mention other future occurrences. The next extraordinary event is a hurricane that will move towards Europe on the 9th to 10th of October and northwest of the island of Madeira, heading towards Portugal. Although this hurricane, for the first time in living memory, will soon collapse again on its way to Europe, it is only the beginning of such events, because in the future it will become more common for hurricanes of this type to head towards Europe and also hit the mainland. What will continue to happen, and indeed already a long time before the hurricane event mentioned, will happen in the Amazon basin, because there a great drought has already begun, from which great and enormous sandstorms will develop and destroy the once very fertile land in such a manner that it can no longer be used economically. The reason for this, as it is the case in other countries around the world, is the fault of the humans on Earth through the overexploitation and destruction of the rainforests, resulting in enormous climate changes. The consequences are droughts and sandstorms, hurricanes, tremendous storms with unusually greater and stronger lightning activity than before, violent hailstorms and hurricanes, as well as torrential rains whose water masses cause ever stronger and more extensive flooding. However, the water also penetrates deep into the earth and into layers that reach down to several kilometers. The waters act in the upper tectonosphere as an earthquake-promoting agent, thus causing light earthquakes. However, the enormous masses of water from extensive flooding also exert pressure on the Earth's crust, affecting plate tectonics as well as the accumulation of heavy materials, such as cities, etc., which inevitably cause displacements and trigger earthquakes. Large earthquakes and seaquakes, however, become world earthquakes, from which the characteristic results that they again influence plate tectonics worldwide and cause it to oscillate. This inevitably leads to the fact that sooner or later, in days, weeks, months, or even years later, new earthquakes will arise from them, whereby, as a rule, a very strong earthquake or seaquake somewhere in the world will in turn cause a very strong earthquake or seaquake. It should also be noted that an earthquake can cause a seaquake, or a seaquake can cause an earthquake. According to our precise investigations, the coming major earthquake in northern Pakistan, in which more than 50,000 humans lost their lives, is a direct consequence of the seaquake off Sumatra on 26th of December 2004. On 13th of October, it also emerged that in the Caucasus, in Kabardino-Balkaria in the city of Nalchik, 100 Chechen terrorist bandits attacked military and police barracks, as well as the airport and the Interior Ministry, etc., causing wild fighting and destruction, killing over 60 humans at first and increasing to around 130 later in further fighting. In Peru, in the area of Machu Picchu, there will be a huge landslide which will block about 2,000 tourists from Europe, the USA, and other countries, while in Spain and Portugal, after the drought and heat, huge masses of rain will fall and flood whole regions. These are the predictions that I can tell you and which will come true by the middle of October. When I then come to the corrections of Hans Georg's book, I will tell you more predictions.
On the 1st of October, we have the obligatory General Assembly, and now the question of whether we will still do our proofreading. Bernadette and I would be in favor of it.
Thus we will keep it so. But we will not continue with the correction work regarding Hans Georg's book until Sunday, the 2nd of October. The same goes for the 8th and 9th of October. We will do the correction work together with Bernadette on Saturday, after which I will not come back until midnight on the 9th of October to do the book corrections of Hans Georg's work together with you. For the 2 days, I will be busy together with some of our experts recording all the data that will be collected during the earthquake in Pakistan. But now it is time for me again, Farewell, dear friend, and Salome.
Salomi Ptah. Goodbye, my friend.